Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, I welcome you all to the fourth and last part of our e-seminar, jointly organized by the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada and International Institute of Social Studies, Rotterdam University Erasmus. The title of our e-seminar is Unwanted Peoples and Boundaries of Citizenship Struggles, Rohingya, Banyamulenge, and others. Today, we are very proud to have a distinguished panel and we'll listen to their insights. So before we go to the event, traditionally, we acknowledge the treaty. And let me read out the treaty acknowledgement first. The Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, next 1 hour and a half, we intend to update you about number of issues with these two cases. Today, our moderator is Professor Helen Hinton from Rotterdam University, and she will be taking over briefly. The sequence we will follow today is myself and Delphine Nathanyoma from the Rotterdam University will be updating you briefly about the situation in the Congo and Myanmar. And then we'll go to the main panel discussions with the panelists. And then we'll end up with a short video that we have prepared to share with you today. And then we'll open up for the Q&A session. And dear audience, please write your comments, your questions and concerns in the Facebook and YouTube live stream pages that you are watching now. And we'll get your questions from there and we'll flash it on the screen. And afterwards, George Budago Mukako would be summarizing the four-part e-seminar. And then finally, we'll end up with the concluding remarks from our guests. So this is what we are going to follow today. So without further ado, let me hand over the floor to Professor Helen Hinton, and she's going to intro the speakers and guide us to the main discussions. Professor Helen, floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. And this last in the series of four seminars on unwanted people and issues of boundaries and citizenship. We've had lots of debate. Today, we're going to try and really integrate the comparisons and also maybe learn some lessons. And we'll be helped in that by our speakers. Each of them will deal with one case study, but we'll also integrate the case studies at the end. And we'll be helped in this by George and by a short video, and obviously by your questions online. So please pose your questions on Facebook and on YouTube. And our host, Dr. Kausar Ahmed, will bring those questions to our speakers later. So please don't hesitate to put those down for us. Thank you, as we go through this session. We have roughly until 5 o'clock in Netherlands time, which is 10 o'clock in Canada time. But if we run a few minutes over, please forgive us. Each speaker has roughly 15 to 20 minutes. I suggest 15. And I will be working behind the scenes to make sure they don't overspeak. We're going to start straight away with Adile Kibasumba. She'll be followed by Eureka Cowper-Smith. And respectively, they'll be talking about the Banyamulenge and the Rohingya situations. Then we have Fidel Sebahizi, who's I'm very happy to have him with us. Welcome to all of you. And if time permits, Onesphore will join from the crisis group, who he seems to be traveling and that may not work today due to internet reasons. Finally, we're very happy to have Yasmin Ullah. I have actually met Yasmin a long time ago, well, a year ago at least, in ISS when there was a conclave, if you remember, Yasmin, some time ago. And you were there as a speaker, and it was great to meet all of you. So welcome, everybody. And I won't forget, last but definitely not least, George Budagu Makoko will actually try to do the difficult task of summing up the whole four seminars in this series. So, George, we'll make sure that you have time for that. Thank you very much. Adele, over to you. Please unmute your mic, Adele.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Helen. Thanks for the organizers for this amazing event. It's been really interesting and I've learned quite a lot. My name is Adele Kibasumba. I am from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from the Banyamulenge community. I moved to the state back in 2007, after surviving the massacre, the Gatumba massacre of 2004 in Gatumba. Currently, I'm a leader of the Banyamulenge community in the States, one of the biggest community of one of the biggest community in the of Banyamulenge around, I would say, around the world, under the umbrella of Mahoro Peace Association. Mahoro Peace Association is a US-based Congolese, mainly from Banyamulenge community organization, which advocates for peaceful cohabitation between tribes and facilitate development in the Eastern Republic of Congo. Our main focus has been advocacy and capacity building of our newly 7,000 members in the States. We estimate that 95% of our members have benefited from refugee resettlement program. Our members have endured and ended up fleeing the same persecution that Banyamulenge continue to face in DRC. Many of them have families, members in the midst of the current conflict in Minembwe, and myself included. When the conflict started, the humanitarian organization that were on the ground packed up and left in the fear of their safety. As humanitarian crisis became dire, a call for humanitarian aid was made by excuses that the area is inaccessible. However, it was hard to understand how the same organizations would find a way to access Bunia, Beni, Butembo, and many areas like Minembwe to deliver aid. For many Banyamulenge, it became easy to assume that the humanitarian organization may have fallen into a political trap which stigmatized the Banyamulenge. I have to give a shout out to the Samaritan Purse, which has a big presence in Bunia. In the past, we know that there was a local NGO in Minembwe that sought help in vain, but with the help of some of the organization, some of the members of our organization who lobbied and convinced them to deliver it to Minembwe, it was successful and they were able to do it. So thanks to them. There were various churches around the states that have donated towards our cause and deserve to be also recognized. As a diaspora with a strong community ties to the whole plateau of Uvira, Fizi, and Mwenga, we had to quickly organize ourselves to help as much as we could. We asked every member to contribute monthly in order to deal with the unprecedented crisis. We had to work with communities to form humanitarian committees to help in aid distribution. These committees were volunteers from all pillars of the communities, women, youth, pastors, and local chiefs. Currently, Mahoro Peace Association have managed to open up cuisines which feed malnourished children, elderly in 10 villages, including one IDP camp in Mikenke. We have supplied improved seed to the 10 cooperatives. We have also managed to provide basic household items, tents to 107 families returning to their destroyed villages in Kamombo. Mahoro Peace Association has awarded roofing for rebuilding for 24 houses burned in the recent attacks in Kahuela. We also have assisted in the victims of attacks with medical bills in Minembwe, Bukavu, and Goma. Lastly, with the increased hate speeches swirling around the country against Banyamulenge, many Banyamulenge have been victims of false arrests. We work with local human rights lawyers to assist and to defend the detainees for their wrongful detentions. Our work meets a lot of challenges. Since the conflict erupted, the roads have been completely closed off by rebels and unsafe for the Banyamulenge to use. All aids have to be transported by plane. The airfare costs as much as buying food items. This means that if we have 10,000 to buy aid, 5K will go towards food, and the rest will go toward the airfare. Also communication, especially in times of fightings and attack, all communication systems usually are cut off. Therefore, getting credible information may take time to access, and as a result, it hinders a quick response or even aid deliveries. There are opportunities for international organizations and churches to work with the diaspora to help in needs. In part because the diaspora speaks the language of aid and the language of need. Many times we understand the standards for the donors, but we also understand the needs on the ground. Donors can finance diaspora organizations when they are, accredited as NGOs with international status, while most of donors cannot donate directly to local organizations. One of the main challenges that the traditional humanitarian actors raise before collaborating with diaspora community like ours is the issue of neutrality and impartiality. But we should, however, come over this misconception. Does being connected to a community necessarily means that you are not impartial? I will give an example through a video, and that's why I wanted to share. Okay, so bear with me as I share my screen. Okay. Are you able to see this? Yes? Helen, are you able to see? I'm sorry, I'm still learning this.
Adele, please either press share screen or we can move on.
Okay. It's okay. I will. It's not allowing me to share. So I was going to share a video of some of the aid that have been delivered in Minembwe, and that you see that the diaspora is quite open to help everyone that is within the same location. We do not choose to say that we're going to help the Banyamulenge, even though our diaspora is many Banyamulenge, and we do all our aid really come from our members. All the Banyamulenges are mainly our main donors. But when the aid gets to the whole plateaus, all the population, all the communities that live within Minembwe, they all benefit from our donors. So we can do our job. We do have our own ways of, like, we have an opinion on how we think of the conflict, but it does not imply that we cannot provide aid to everyone. So the diaspora may come from a community group, from a minority group of, or a politically sensitive area like the Banyamulenge, and then the Rohingya population. Does not mean that they're providing assistance only to the affected people from their specific community or group. diaspora's intervention may actually bring community together, paving the way towards the conflict resolution. And that video was a perfect example, because you see a Mufulero woman who was thanking the Banyamulenge for giving them aid, and telling the women of Banyamulenge who were behind her, saying that you should thank your children, and you know, and I hope my kids also learn from it, that they can provide aids to you. So it was just a beautiful way to unite the community, and showing that they're suffering. They all share the sufferings that they're going through, and it's just a beautiful thing to see that even people who incite hate and divisions among the community, they're surprised to see that communities come together to share the experiences that they have gone through. So in conclusion, the diaspora have rose to the occasions because they feel connected to the communities affected by the conflict. But the dimensions of the crisis is too large for diaspora alone to handle. The Congolese government should take the first step in restoring peace, also accelerating the road accessibility to areas atrophied by the conflict, and also rehabilitate the communities that have been broken down. The houses, the schools, the churches, and community centers. So that's all about my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adele. We'll make sure that the video is looked at briefly later. Sorry for that technical problem. I think that Yasmin there was nodding at the end of your presentation when you said the diaspora cannot cope with all the challenges. And I think that we're going to hear more about that now. Yasmin Ullah, welcome. Please introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me properly? Perfect. Thank you. My name is Yasmin Ullah. I have been a Rohingya activist for very, very short time compared to a lot of you here. I've been just starting to work on the cause since 2017, when the massacre, one of the largest one that actually rendered more than 740,000 people to flee to Bangladesh, which is the country on the border. And it has caused us to become, actually the refugee camps now have become one of the largest settlement of refugees in the world. So I've been doing things that are a little bit confusing as well. And I think that Adil sort of mentioned a little bit of that. There is not really a clear role of what a diaspora could do. And I think I stumbled in the dark for the most part. I think I still do, but I have a little bit of a candle in my hand, and it helps to be able to see a little bit of how the world works. But more of what I want to talk about today is you know, what could be our future, and the same kind of struggle that Adil had mentioned earlier, that there is really the challenge and the burden that falls onto the shoulder of people in the diaspora, because we speak the language of aid, just as she puts it really, really beautifully, because we speak the language of the international community, English or otherwise. It has become such a burdensome task for us to not just find ourselves, find our footing within this world, but also work it out. The international legal mechanism, we have to know it in and out. The aid organization, the top down, the bottom up, all these various different web, that is tangled together, that has become the international community. We have to navigate it ourselves. And it's just, I feel that there's such a high expectation on us that sometimes it's not based in reality. It's not practical. And that is just, my point that I really want to highlight, because Adil had said it so beautifully. I think that for Rohingya to have any future at all, this is our third year, over 3 years after the last known, huge massacre that has been extensively documented, rape, mass rape by the military, so many other kinds of persecution that is still ongoing on a daily basis. To this day, the military has used Rohingya children, specifically people from the vulnerable population, actually to be the shield when they are fighting with the armed groups. And there are so many children that have died very, very recently. On the other side, in the refugee camps, during the COVID pandemic, they have not come to anything close to recovering from the actual pandemic itself. We still lack a lot of resources, let alone water, to be able to drink, to be able to use for our daily lives. And so forget about washing our hands, forget about anything else. Some of the camps have actually ran out of water completely for months now. And this is the effects of the international community being stagnant or taking its sweet time to actually react to a problem when it's actually not a burden of the diaspora to make noises alone. It is actually something that the international community have not really perfected in so many different kinds of mass atrocities that have already transpired, but it's still, stuck in the same loop of how do we react fast enough, or how do we try to take our time to not react at all, which is very, very common in the Western Hemisphere. We have seen so many, slap on the hand, slap on the wrist type of gesture that have come out. I'm going to call Canada out for this. And it's unfortunate that within the Rohingya context, we've had the motion passed within the parliament. We've had so many things done, but it is all words. It is all gestures. Are you guys hearing me properly? Okay, perfect. Sorry, I thought I might be breaking off. And so I think the actual realization that the international community, the Rohingya community, and many other vulnerable communities that have gone through something very similar have to come together with this realization is that if this system, if this UN system, if this UN Security Council system, or if this is, the kind of legal justice mechanism, if these are not working, what options do we have? And I don't know if we're ready for it. There has been so many attempts to try and be critical of the UN system that has somewhat enabled the genocide to happen within Myanmar. From the UN Commission, actually she's Canadian, and she's now been relocated. I think she's now serving in India. But at the time of her terms in Myanmar, she was actually suppressing reports that were coming out of Rakhine State just right before the acts of genocide were committed in 2017. And these were the actual reality that the system is actually working against itself, and it's competing, and it's divided, and it's so messy. We as a diaspora have to figure that out. The community, the Rohingya community, and so many other vulnerable communities have to figure that out. Why so? Why do we have to be the one, having to figure it out? So this is one thing of, pointing this out, but also pointing at the international community as a whole. We have a hard time committing to the covenants that we've signed, or the covenant that we have actually participated in, specifically the Genocide Convention or the Mass Atrocities Prevention. And it has a lot of economic aspect to it. Capitalism had rendered our world actually completely broken and poor to this day. Many percentage of people, majority of the people within this world are living under the poverty line. And this is not a mistake. This is not an accident by any stretch of the mean. For the Rohingya population or for any other communities, capitalism has been the key to the reason why we have not found the actual sustainable resolution. There is China that has stopped, any sort of approach, any sort of initiative that the UN Security Council, the 5 countries, the 5 nation states that want to somewhat, try to negotiate, try to retaliate against Myanmar for having committed genocide. And China has been the, the shield that Myanmar had put up somewhat. And because of the deep sea port, or the, the pipelines that were built from Rakhine State right into Kunming, Yunnan State, these are all economic incentives that Myanmar has been using, has been leveraging in order to flee, in order to be shielded from responsibility over the lives that were lost, over the kind of atrocities that were committed against Rohingya. So how do we change any of it at all? I actually don't hold a lot of hopes in the structure, the structure of the UN system, or the nation states, or the conventions that were signed to work off of its own entity, to work off of its own value system. But for public majority, for lay people, for people that have no idea what legal mechanisms are out there, for people that have no idea what happens to people in, in various different countries, for people who know very little about, any sort of political agenda at all, to actually understand and see the different narratives that we can put out. And I think it's universal to all of the communities that are currently suffering, that how we put ourselves out there as a diaspora has a lot of effect into how people actually generalize our picture or our image as a whole. And this has to change. So within the Rohingya context, there is a lot of issues around Rohingya being erased, Rohingya being called Bengali, Rohingya being called Kalar, Rohingya being called so many different names apart from being called Rohingya. And this is one of the things that has to change. And how do we change that? We change it culturally. We change it through working with museums, which I've done in the past, and continuously I'm trying to do that as well. Because people that come to museums, people that come to commemorations like these, they tend to seek out these sort of information, and it helps to, to sort of try to congregate, or try to make sure that these items, or these cultural aspects that we try to influence become something educational. And that has been something that I worked on with the Montreal Holocaust Museum, that's called a genocide learning tool. And this is being taught for the K-12 or the grade 12 students in the genocide studies. So this is part of the curriculum that is available for the teachers to use across Canada. That's one thing. And it's sort of helped compare Rohingya system, like the Rohingya, how the otherizing happened within the Rohingya context in comparison to the Holocaust. So that was really, really powerful in a way, because it helps shape young mind. If we cannot change people in our generation, let's try to do that. In a younger people. Now, another aspect of this is to try to do everything that we possibly can, as hard as it is, obviously in aid, obviously in trying to sustain people until we actually get to the final resolution, until we get to the resolving, to the reparation state, to the reparation stage, which I don't think that any communities have had a success story in that, where everybody becomes, happy. The rebuilding of the communities have been successful. It takes years of that. I take Rwanda as an example in terms of like gender representation, but there's so many other issues that Rwanda still face to this day. I think that it is going to be the same for Rohingya, or maybe a little bit worse, because we do not have a state of our own, or we are not accepted within our own country or our own nation state. So that is how we change it in the legal aspect. it has to be pursued internationally, and it has to be pursued within the country that the problem transpired. So with trying to pursue the justice mechanism, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the perpetrators have to be subjected to punishments, to punitive measure in the international stage, because this is, in violation of the covenant that's signed internationally. But also, we need to build allyship within the country that will help us be accepted and be reintegrated within the country by talking to the youth, by actually speak to the people who see the value in building those allyships, those connections. And I've been trying to do that for the past year and a half, in trying to connect with people inside Myanmar, especially youth who are trying to move forward into a true democratic transition where everyone is actually celebrated, and equality is the main value that we pursue. And that is how we begin to try to pursue the changes in the legal judiciary system within the country, to try and validate our existence, not just as human, but as a people that belong to Myanmar, not a people that come from elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I didn't want to interrupt the flow between Adele and Yasmin. I think there's a seamless message between these two presentations, which I thought worked fantastically well. However, Dr. Ahmed would like to introduce another guest here, so go ahead.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome and introduce Professor A.K. Mazharul Islam, and who joined us from Bangladesh. And Professor Mazhar is a full professor at Shahjal University of Science and Technology, and he is also an adjunct at BRAC James P. Grant School of Public Health. And the reason he's with us today, he's going to conclude our session, and he is right from the ground zero. And by trade an anthropologist, he has a very profound interest in the conflict, and very delighted to have him with us this morning. Thank you very much, Professor Mazhar. So without further disturbance, let me go back to our moderator, Professor Helen. Helen, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Ahmed, for having me, Dr. Ahmed, in the panel. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. We move then next. I think I've lost my list of order. Yes, we move next. Thank you very much, both Adele and Yasmin, for outlining so clearly what some of the issues are for the diaspora and how they're confronted with structural problems that are, I think you both made the case that they're pretty much common to many, many unwanted peoples, whether it's the Banyamulenge and Rohingya, or whether in fact it's other groups altogether, such as the Uyghurs or any other, the Muslims in India and so on. I think you've made this point very well. And thank you so much to both of you. We'll now move to Fidel Sabahizi. Yuriko, did I forget you? Yes, I did. I moved straight to Yasmin because she was nodding her head. So we'll first move to Fidel, if that's okay, Yuriko, and then we'll come to you. Is that all right? Yes? My apologies. So Fidel Sabahizi, maybe you could briefly introduce yourself and then we'll move to Yuriko. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes, thanks so much for this opportunity. My name is Fidel Sabahizi. I've been in the United States for 13 years, since 2007. I'm a PhD student in criminal justice, homeland security at Liberty University. As I said, I'm a member of the Banyamulenge community in the United States. And the title of my presentation today is going to be Banyamulenge Stigma and Identity Collapse. Let me try to share my screen. Can you see it? Okay. Delphi, can you help me?
Can you, Fidel, can you send the slides to me instead? I will put it up for you.
I sent my.
And you can go on.
Okay. Let me move on. I'm sorry.
Fidel, could you send the slides to Kauser Ahmed, please, and then he'll show them. Thank you. But just carry on with your presentation, please.
All right. So as I said, I'll be talking about Banyamulenge stigma and identity collapse. All right, so what is stigma? Stigma is an ancient social construct, a label attached by a society. Derived from Greek, stigma means to pierce a tattoo through a painful process of using a hot metal instrument. According to Merriam-Webster, first definition, stigma is a mark or shame or discredit. And stigmatization is the process of spreading messages through communities to teach their members to recognize the disgraced and to react accordingly. So before I discuss the Banyamulenge stigma, it is important to talk about the theoretical framework of stigma. Goffman was a Canadian. He used terms like abomination and hatred when he explained stigma. Spoiling one's identity or rejecting one's full acceptance is in society indicate the occurrence of stigma. So basically, there are four main types of stigma. There is public stigma, which takes place in a community. There's a self stigma, which takes place in oneself. But also, there is a stigma by association. That is when one stigma impacts it's his family or his friends. And finally, there's a structural stigma, which is perpetrated by government institutions or officials. So one question that I asked myself: why do some people choose to stigmatize others? And I found out that those who choose to stigmatize others possess both intention and cognitive resources to do so. It is, however, ridiculous that stigmatizing others actually stigmatizes a good feeling. So basically, they feel good about stigmatizing others. If you go to slide number 5, please. Number 5, slide number 5. So I'll keep talking. So now let's look at the stigma impact on the Banyamulenge community in most Central African countries, as well as out of Africa. Slide 6, please. So yeah, keep on going. The next one. Yes. So the first and second Congo Wars, which is 1996 and 1998, just expanded an existing stigma. The first war was led by Laurent Desire Kabila, who was not a member of the Banyamulenge community, but the war was fought in the name of the Banyamulenge. So you may guess what the consequences were. The reason behind the naming this war was said to be the threats and harassment of Banyamulenge by local and national authorities during the Mobutu regime when the country was still called Zaire. But according to Turner, this war was a war of nations against nations, France and Zaire on one side, and the United States, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Rwanda on the other side. But during the Second War, Banyamulenge were found on one side of the RCD, which was supported by Rwanda, in the fight against the Congolese government of Kabila. Next slide, please. Stigmatization in DRC. For many decades, Banyamulenge have been labeled foreigners, Rwandan refugees, Rwandans, infiltrators by other tribes, which is the dominant group. Their appearance, features such as nose, mouth, were used to create insults against them. They will say things like, close your mouth for no reason. But according to Amnesty International in 1996, the police and National Army helped in the stigmatization of Banyamulenge and other people in the country. It should be noted that even before the First and Second Wars, members of the Banyamulenge were stigmatized. Some even changed their names when, for example, they took the national exam to avoid being discriminated against simply based on their unique names. Next slide. Now, stigmatization in Rwanda. This is a social aspect of it. I spoke with a number of people who lived in Rwanda. So manipulating the Banyamulenge identity was a big problem in boarding schools, for example. Rwandan students will use phrases such as abaturage, which means the uncivilized. And because of the unique or an accent that stands out, they'll find words where Banyamulenge accent was apparent and use those words against them. For example, like Muntu slogan. How Banyamulenge and Rwandans pronounce this term is very different. Banyamulenge use, they say like Muntu with an emphasis on the last three letters and TU, but the Banyarwanda or Rwandans will pronounce it differently. They will say Muntu. So you can hear that the NTU is for Banyarwanda or for Rwandans, it's not, it doesn't stand out as Banyamulenge. Of course, this resulted in the concealment of their identity, even though it was not easy to do so for some people. So the hiding of identity was characterized by changing names, mostly for women. They chopped their names in half by removing the prefix NYA, which is Nya. As you can see for some examples, for people who went to Rwanda with like a name or like Nyagaju, so they removed the NYA. Now you can call them, or now they call themselves Gaju, just to try to see if they can fit within the community or the society. Next slide, please. As I said, there is a political aspect of Banyamulenge stigma in Rwanda. In 1996, for example, Rwanda, through James Kabarebe, announced its invasion into Zaire to protect Banyamulenge. However, in 2002, when Banyamulenge soldiers led by Masunzu, now Lieutenant General, were fighting the Rwandan-backed political party, the RCD. So James Kabarebe, the same person who spoke that about invading Zaire to protect the Banyamulenge, said that Banyamulenge were not Congolese. So he contested the citizenship of Banyamulenge because of the war that was taking place in the highlands of Mulenge. So he said this during a student conference or a public conference at ULK or the local university. And so he basically argued that the Banyamulenge were in Congo for just opportunities. According to Vlasen Root and other sources, Banyamulenge have refused the demand of Rwandan military officers several times to have all Banyamulenge move into refugee camps in Rwanda. Next slide, please. Now, in Burundi, Banyamulenge were also stigmatized. They came up with a term, abanyamunyamu. It's a fabricated term that has no meaning. As you can see, I tried to show it. Basically, they took the term Banyamulenge. So they cut it in half and they add the extra nyamu, which came from nowhere, and they took out lenge. So they came up with that term just to find ways to stigmatize them. So the impact of this stigma was something, the hiding of identity for some Banyamulenge by changing their names into Burundian sounding names. Next slide, please. Now, in Tanzania, there was a creation of misconception and defamation, especially in refugee camps. For example, in 2004, a small number of Banyamulenge refugees were always suspected of conducting a raid to the camp they were living in. This misconception about Banyamulenge can also be seen even in the parliament of Tanzania. There's actually a YouTube video, I'm not going to show it, of what appears to be a parliament session where parliament member Hasna Mulima of the Kigoma district is complaining that law enforcement officers harass her residents by asking them on checkpoints if they are Banyamulenge or not. Next slide. In Kenya, Banyamulenge have been defamed in several ways, and it is believed that the defamation began when Hutu refugees from Rwanda and Congolese refugees arrived in Kenya from 1996 and up. And it is widely believed that these refugees claimed they were fleeing Banyamulenge. According to a recent news article by Mukinda, there's actually an outlawed gang group called Banyamulenge in Kenya. I spoke with an individual who lived in Kenya for a very long time. This individual told me that one time he saw a house gate with the following statement: "This gate is protected by Banyamulenge 24 hours." I was also told by one person that one day during a public meeting, a church conference meeting, a group of people gathered to share a meal. When a fly landed on a meal, a Kenyan citizen exclaimed, "This fly is rude like Banyamulenge." You can see how defamed Banyamulenge were in Kenya. Next slide, please. So now, identity collapse out of Africa. You can probably think that this ended back in Africa, but that's not the case. Stigmatized Banyamulenge in Western nations still exhibiting signs of stigma. Unfortunately, many Banyamulenge find themselves between Congo and Rwanda. And the entire community gets blamed for this by other communities in Congo. For example, there are famous gospel singers in North America who cannot perform in Congo, but Rwanda feels home for them. Even admitting in public that they are members of Banyamulenge does not become easier. Though most people know them well, so people know them, but for them to, to be on the camera like this and announce or say that they're Banyamulenge, it's very, very, very hard for them. So they use what I call a Rwandan umbrella to protect the fam, and that can be understandable sometimes. Another point is Rwandan news media have attempted to manipulate Banyamulenge's success overseas by claiming that Banyamulenge's successful people were Rwandans. This is an example. Agathe Uwilingimana is Adele's sister. She is the author of How Dare the Sun Rise. In the past, she was given access to speak on a UN platform dedicated for women, and one of the Rwandan online newspaper, Nyarwanda.com, published an article claiming that a Rwandan girl had spoken on the UN platform. Next slide. This is my last slide. It's a takeaway. So basically, I encourage all stigmatized people, not only Banyamulenge. I hear that Rohingya people are stigmatized, and I heard Yasmin talking about being called this name or this term and stuff like that. I encourage them to stay away from believing what other people, stigmatizers or the dominant group, talk about them. Once again, thank you so much for making these e-seminars available. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Fidel, for also staying within the time really comfortably. I appreciate that very much. And again, with your video, perhaps these videos may not be shown here today, but we can always include them in a final report, which I'm sure will be accessible on the website of our partner in Winnipeg's organization. So having heard from Adele and Yasmin and Fidel, I think going with Fidel, we go back, I think, to the question of identity in a very concrete way. And I come now to Yuriko and open the floor to you. Yuriko, maybe you would like to say a few words about yourself as well. Thank you.
Hello, Kelsey, would you be able to share my slides? Thank you.
Sorry, something has come up in front of the slides. I think we've moved from the slides to something else. I think we need to get out of.
Apology, I'm just trying to go back to the slide. So the best we can do is to have it on the screen. Yuriko, that is the best I think you can do.
Carry on.
If you press the little screen at the bottom, is it possible? Like the
it switches the slide, so I will try to enlarge as.
Okay.
As
oh, you can't go
as
to slideshow?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think
the,
that's fine if everyone can see it. Okay, great. My name is Yuriko Kemper-Smith, and I'm a PhD candidate in political science at the University of Guelph. I am wrapping up my PhD. I will be defending in December this year, so this is the tail end of my life as a student, I hope. So thank you so much for having me here today. I guess I'll give a brief overview of the findings of my research. Kelsey, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. And Yasmin, please jump in or write in the comments if you want to add anything. I realize like I'm giving this perspective that's mostly of yours and your community. So if I'm wrong, please just correct me. So the Rohingya diaspora came to Canada mostly as refugees in the mid-2000s when Bangladesh worked with the UNHCR to provide refugee status and exit visas. Upon arrival, most families establish themselves in Kitchener-Waterloo, but of course there's communities spread out across the country. As Yasmin knows, there's a community in Vancouver, or in British Columbia. In terms of building a social movement, the Rohingya community has developed, as Yasmin has talked about, political visions, solidified their roles as experts and spokespeople on the genocide and related refugee crisis in Bangladesh, have built local and international networks, and developed and refined their tactics for increasing engagement. Across Canada, they have raised the profile of the genocide and refugee crisis, creating grassroots organizations, leading events, leading protests, fundraising efforts, and lobbying government officials. These activities point to the development of a systematic understanding of the situation by bridging on-the-ground expertise with the development of policy or political alternatives, networking, and strategic decision-making. And this is where my research comes in. I want to argue that social movements often engage in mentally or intellectually taxing activities. Movement participants debate their roles, their visions and goals, the strategies used to achieve them. They learn how to seize opportunities, develop connections with people, and broadcast information about the cause. So at first blush, these endeavors really look like highly intellectual exercises. But what happens in the scholarship or in the literature is that these activities aren't looked at as intellectual labor. Indeed, I think, yes, thank you. Indeed, quotes, empirical research on social movements has focused on their modus operandi through protest, but left others of their activities understudied, end quote. And that's from Delaporte and Pavan, 2017. So social movement literature generally focuses on what movements do, but not so much what movements think. But it's equally important to research the intellectual attributes of social movements. So there is some research in this regard. In the literature, knowledge practices are sites within social movements where knowledge is generated, mobilized, modified, and mobilized. And they encompass, quote, the set of practices that foster the coordination of disconnected, local, and highly personal experiences and rationalities within a shared cognitive system, able to provide movements and their supporters with a common orientation for making claims and acting collectively to produce social, political, and cultural change, end quote. Same authors as before. So the purpose of my research was therefore to understand the knowledge practices behind the social movement in Canada, to resist the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar, and to resolve the humanitarian crisis in Bangladesh. So I think that, as Yasmin pointed out as well, that this is a really important movement to study from this lens, precisely because of the newfound nature of the movement, at least in Canada, and the movement's focus on producing an understanding of the Rohingya community and the cause that didn't really exist previously in this country. So in mapping out, oh, sorry, if you don't mind going back, I can't believe I'm still on this slide. Yes, so in mapping out the state of the knowledge practices field, Delaporte and Pavan put together this typology. It includes the knowledge practices of collective self, political alternatives, the action network, and transmission. And so collective self refers to how individual experiences and thoughts join into a larger communal whole. It's also known as the ethos or the political vision of a movement. And to cite the authors, it is about the vision that grounds a collective endeavor, as well as about the envisioned or actual practices that transform this vision into reality, end quote. The political alternatives are the policy options for change that are positioned to counter the current or the status quo understanding of the cause or the crisis. The action network is the infrastructure created and used for circulating information about the cause. And as the authors write, it's the alternative values, it's the ways in which the activists make the alternative values and visions that animate people. And so those are the four, or the action network, and transmission is also the way in which activists make known the information about the cause. So this framework covers off the different aspects of knowledge practices that have been documented in the research. So part of the reason why I use this typology is because I think it's really interesting vein of research, but at the same time, it hasn't been applied to that many movements, especially diaspora-led movements that are seeking transnational goals. So just back to the next slide to the next slide really quickly. These were my methods. I worked with the movement for 2 years as a researcher, but I've continued to stay connected to the cause since. So I conducted 70 qualitative interviews, and I participated in, I was a participant observer in many events. If you don't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. So by applying this typology to my information, I found that these 4 ways, these 4 knowledge practices were integral to the movement. In terms of the collective self, activists took their lived experiences as a point of departure for mobilization. They've developed the collective sentiments of responsibility towards community, awareness about the structural obstacles that they face, and resolve towards a resolution, which combine into the ethos of the movement. And regarding the political vision, they've developed their personal interpretations of the realities, geopolitical realities in Myanmar, Bangladesh, and the international community in terms of what they will do to resolve the crisis, how the opportunities and what the opportunities for activism look like in Canada. And there are many different and perhaps divergent goals for different people. There's a shared political vision to bring recognition of the crisis to the Canadian public, and in doing so, influence and achieve the reinstatement of rights and citizenship of Rohingya people in Myanmar. In terms of the Action Network, the movement has really learned how to seize political opportunities and broaden the support network across the country, which include cross-cutting diverse sectors. In terms of the political alternatives, I think this is one that the movement has done substantial work in, is to successfully transform the public's understanding of the crisis from one of intercommunal conflict to one of genocide. And the Canadian movement has done so much work in this regard, at least in 4 ways: by using the language of genocide in the first place, by shedding light on Aung San Suu Kyi's role or complicity in the genocide, highlighting the gender-based violence aspect of the genocide, and asking Canada to put forward a case in front of the International Court of Justice. These were like 4 angles by which the movement really shifted or transformed the public's understanding of what the crisis is, or what for the genocide for what it is. And lastly, the movement has really developed practices of transmission in order to create more public resonance, bring more people into the cause, and to propel future events. So if we go to the next slide, I think what this implies is that having lost all rights in their country of origin, having survived genocide, statelessness, displacement, while the community has faced extreme persecution on levels that cannot be understated, the knowledge practices point out that the diaspora movement is developing the brain power necessary to counter the genocide and the refugee crisis from abroad. So a fundamental feature of this movement is this generation of knowledge practices that help support the cause. And I think that acknowledgement of these knowledge practices are vital because they manifest part of the reason, the underlying reason behind the movement, and they reflect the expertise that the activists are endowed with. And we can see how the diaspora is paving its way forward. In essence, like writing the textbook or manual about how to advocate for a resolution towards the genocide and the refugee crisis. But I would love to point out Yasmin's presentation again here, because as she mentioned, why is this the diaspora community's burden? It's the international community's responsibility. But the international system, as she said, is working against itself. And so I think this is the question that we're left with, even though this knowledge practice lens can show us how important the knowledge creation within the movement is. People have to meet them at that point. Like, they're doing as much as they can. They shouldn't shoulder this burden. And yeah, I will leave it at that open-ended question. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Yuriko. That was very much in time, and in fact, we've got a reasonable amount of time left, which is great. But the main point I take from your discussion, which builds very nicely on the others, I think, is to do with self-knowledge, both of the diaspora and the lack of self-knowledge of the international community, in a sense, in which hiding knowledge becomes part of knowledge. And I think that's what I get also from both Adele's talk, and in a sense, self-knowledge is part of the talk about stigma, which Fidel also brings in, the importance of self-knowledge and knowledge practices that can counter stigma. So I think there are many, many strands in the discussion so far, which bring together the global, the national, and the individual and group questions of identity and practice, which I think are very forward-looking in many, many ways. So this is the purpose of this last session, to be forward-looking and to be proactive. So thank you, Yuriko, for bringing a more academic perspective on this. And I think both you and Fidel have done that, and that's been very helpful indeed. So I think now I need to ask Dr. Ahmed, are you planning to invite Professor Islam to speak, or is Professor Islam performing some other function here?
Professor Islam would be speaking at the last. We finish with summarize. He will conclude the whole session. So now we aim to show the video if you want. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very short clip, about 3 minutes, less than 3 minutes. We are going to show you today, and this was suggested by Professor Helen. And the title of this YouTube video is "Perpetrators, Passive and Active Bystanders in Mass Violence" by Professor Erwin. Professor Erwin Staub. So, just be with us for this brief 3 minutes present video.
I cannot tell you how pleased I am to be here with you, and also honored. Interconnected. They are interconnected in my thinking. They are interconnected in their meaning, and I hope that it will be interconnected for you as well. These are some of the sources that I use and refer to in this talk. Intense violence between groups doesn't suddenly emerge. Even when it looks like it does, there was a report by a commission led by Madeleine Albright and William Cohen, important American politicians, who described certain intense violent events as volcanic. If you really study it, you can see the evolution that leads, the social behavioral evolution that leads to intense forms of violence. I believe that we can identify the conditions that make violence probable, but we cannot from an early point say what kind of violence it is going to turn out to be. So, for example, if you want to prevent genocide, if you want to prevent large-scale mass killing, you cannot wait until it becomes genocide, because then you are really not preventing it. You have to respond early to the indicators that show that there is likely to be this kind of an evolution leading leading to violence. Now, of course, you can see along the way how this evolution progresses and violence begins and then intensifies and so on. But even before there is significant violence, you can identify the likelihood that there will be such violence. Because of this especially, it's important to understand the roots of violence, what leads to it, in order for us to respond to them, to these conditions. Now, I am going to very briefly describe some of the starting points and some of the psychological and social processes that make large-scale group violence probable. And the basis for this is my analysis.
So, the audience, so that was the part of the video that we intended to share with you. The detailed link of the video will be found in our Facebook and YouTube channel. Please have a look. It has wonderful resources, and it is very important in the perspective of both the cases of Rohingya and Banyamulenge. Helen, back to you.
If I can just say one word, it's a very obvious thing that Dr. Irvin Staub, Professor Irvin Staub is saying. It's simply saying that it's all very well to define a genocide after it's happened. That's relatively easy. What's not so easy is to look out carefully for the signs that it may happen. And that's where preventative work is not successful in the UN system. As Yasmin Ullah said, in the case of Myanmar, the UN failed to resolve the dissonance between one set of accounts and another set of accounts. And the same is happening now in the DRC, that it's seen as inter-ethnic violence, and we haven't yet managed to change the discourse on that towards warning actually of genocide that is not widely accepted as a framework. So that's why Staub, I think, is helpful here. I'll hand over back to you, Professor Ahmed. Thank you very much. I think my job is done.
Thank you, Professor Helen, and I think you have done very well. Excellent for helping us to navigate through this discussion. So, the audience, the session is open for Q&A, and as promised, we are going to take some of the questions and observations that our viewers put forward within this past 1 hour, over 1 hour now. So, but today we don't have many questions as we typically expect. So that is why we'll just show one comment here by Dodo Murenge, and this is what he or she, I mean, he wants to or she wants to put forward. And if any panelist would like to comment, you are welcome if you want. And today we have a lot of discussions going on in terms of various groups within the Congo, Rwanda, and how these groups are making these whole things understandable in terms of violence.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so actually I was, this morning I was writing an article about that question, particular questions about, the coalition of Mai Mai and those armed groups from Burundi. So Banyamulenge refugees, as of right now, today, they're having issues in Burundi due to that coalition. So what's happening is very, very unknown, and we don't know what's causing that to happen. Banyamulenge refugees in Burundi have been harassed, arrested for no apparent reason. And this was due to some fighters from the Red Tabara armed group who were, arrested on a Rwandan territory. So it was said that they crossed from Burundi into Rwanda, And those who were arrested, they say that they have been fighting alongside rebels from the Banyamulenge community just to make things more complicated. So the result is that the government in Burundi has decided to, go against Banyamulenge refugees, believing what has been said by those fighters, those armed groups, saying that. So, is what is interesting is those fighters from Redi Tabara, for example, in Congo, they are the ones who have been fighting or killing, looting, burning Banyamulenge houses, villages. But now it's it's hard to explain it, because now they're saying that they have been fighting alongside rebels from Banyamulenge who have been fighting against them in the Congo, just to make things complicated. Now, Banyamulenge refugees in Burundi, they are under high pressure from the government in Burundi, believing that now we have these refugees on our soil, and they have been partnering with rebels who have been trying to attack our country. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add on that matter.
Thank you so much, Fidel, for your comments. So here is the second comment, I would say, from Solange Umutesi, and this is what the audience has put forward. And once again, if any panelist can step in and clarify or expand on this comment, please. And this is, I think, quite interesting question, whether it will bring more divisions and racism and scrutinize the leadership and the governance of DRC. If not, then we'll switch to a question. I think it's a very general question and a very important one. What role does security plays with one's identity?
You could ask the question, identity play in one's security.
I think I can go. I think that it's. I'm hearing a little. I'm hearing a little bit of. Sorry. Okay. It is extremely important. It's vital, actually, to be ensured that you're going to step outside and you will not be killed, or you will not be harassed, or you will not be, asked to present an ID. There are so many different kind of security we're talking about. There has to be a security in the economic perspective, that one can actually go outside, work, try to make something out of themselves. There are also security in terms of state security, identification. The security in terms of how one should not be persecuted for unfair reasons. There are other kinds of security, legal security, legal insurance of one's identity, that it's going to be protected in the judiciary system. There's also security in ensuring that the kind of injustice that will happen will also be, if an injustice transpired against somebody from one community, then that would be met with sort of punitive measures, or somewhat a legal consequence, or some other consequences. So
there's so many different kinds, and I think the important thing to remember is that in so many atrocity that happened all around the world, it is really important to check in with those communities on how many kinds of security or how many kind of, assurance of one's existence in this world have been violated. This is basically, for Rohingya at least, every sort of security measure or everything that we hold dear, something that helps us be able to, exist in this world and not be erased, not be forgotten. It is so, it's already been violated in so many, different folds. And the fact that it took the international community this long to even question whether or not, Rohingya are being protected. For example, the issue of legal identification or the state protection that we get out of basically being in the IDP camps or being forced to accept the national verification card, which rendered us foreigners. Those are, those are built into the security, which should be, provided by the state protection, by the bylaws that have to do with citizenship, which has been stripped from us, stripped away from us since 1982. So I'm not sure that I'm clearly identifying all of the factors, but this is basically the risk factors in I think in identifying the sort of mass atrocities on whether or not it happened.
Thank you, Yasmin, very much. I think it's a very well-rounded response. And this is very important because it applies to both the cases of Rohingyas and Banyamulenge. I'll take the last question today before we go over to the next part. And this is kind of directed to Dr. Helen. And so Belgium's part in the conflict. So I think she's an expert on this. She can comment. Go ahead, Helen.
Thank you, King Yaka. And I see that you have one of my favorite pictures of Lumumba there, because Lumumba is actually one of my heroes. But anyway, I did talk about this last seminar. We clearly talked about this. King Yaka, I'm not a presenter today. I'm just the chair, and I'm not supposed to talk. But if you want to know my opinion on what the Belgians did, I've written a chapter on the case of Lumumba, the man who's obviously close to your heart. And I've actually explained how Lumumba was betrayed by the United Nations and by Hammarskjöld, who is considered a patron saint of UN. So I'm very, very much on the same page with you. I know that Belgian conflicts between Flemish and Walloon were projected onto Congolese, onto Rwandans. I know that theories about race, like the theory of the Hamitic hypothesis, I've done a lot of work on that, related to that. So please do look up the work I've done. One of the articles is called When Identity Becomes a Knife. It's not a very nice title, but it aptly describes what happens when you label people with racial, colonial, and imperial labels. So I'm absolutely on the same page with you, King Yaka. I salute you.
Any more comments from the panelists? If not, then I'll switch to the next part. Okay, fair enough. We'll switch to the next part, and now both Delphine Nathanioma from ISS Netherlands and myself here, we are going to give a brief update about the situation on the ground, and then we'll switch to George for summarizing the whole session. So Delphine, please go ahead and share your information with the audience, what is going on right now in Congo.
Thank you so much for insightful presentation from Yasmin, Yuriko, Fidel, and Adele. I just have to make 2 or 3 points before maybe go through some of the updates around Banyamulenge. I want just to highlight from Adele's presentation within the neighborhood of where Banyamulenge currently besieged, there is a region called the Mid Plateau of Mtambala. You can find some of the humanitarian agencies and organizations helping people, displaced people. I've failed to understand why they can't support or help Banyamulenge. They've been explaining or trying to get an excuse of infrastructure, roads, and the cost of transport. And then this leads me to a second point. By July last year, the Congolese government had allocated $400,000 to rehabilitate the road from Fizi to Minembwe. We don't know what happened to this large amount of $500,000. It disappeared within the hands of key influential people in Kinshasa. Maybe the last one that also to go back to the point of someone who asked a question on breaking the borders on Banyamulenge. It reminds me that was a session attended in 2018 where someone was describing Banyamulenge, and then she goes to Fidel's presentation. He was presenting Banyamulenge as a group of people who are in a no man's land position. You find them in Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Congo, and then they are not accepted in all these countries. I had simply to make 4 points of updates on what's happening to Banyamulenge right now. I think one of the points was raised by Fidel. It's what's happening in Burundi. It's turning to be a manhunt against Banyamulenge for specifically one reason. When a Banyamulenge is speaking in front of a Burundian would feel he's a Rwandan. While a Banyamulenge speaking in front of a Rwandan, sometimes is confused or she is confused as a Burundian. Then, when Burundi is facing security issues, it's more concentrating on Kinyarwanda speakers, not mainly Banyamulenge. And then there is such a confusion of Banyamulenge, whether Banyamulenge are Congolese or a Rwandan. For a Burundian security services, they simply feel when someone is speaking, he's a Rwandan. They have already arrested more than 100 people. 60 were expelled from Burundi to Congo. Many have started hiding in Burundi. Next to what's happening in Congo, then becomes another issue on Banyamulenge living in Burundi. I think we possibly needed to voice on that. 2 weeks back in Congo, I think last time George has mentioned it, there was a process of making official a rural municipality, one among hundreds. Thank you. And then there is a huge mobilization once again, trying to portray Banyamulenge as foreigners who are not entitled to live on Congolese soil. One of the supply routes where Banyamulenge could expect to get food has been blocked last week, making Banyamulenge more suffering for starving because they will no longer be able to get food. and it's getting blocked from armed group who are probably planning to more make Banyamulenge starving. The last point, I was shocked by a visit of a journalist from France, if I'm not mistaken, who visited Minembwe, and later on he wrote an article describing Minembwe, as I know today, as something called a Tutsi enclave, meaning it's a land within another land with the people who are different from other people. I was more shocked to have such a media outlet trying to portray Banyamulenge, who are suffering, who have been besieged for roughly 1.5 years, and then you simply portray them as a people who do not have any problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Delphine, for a quick update. And I will also now share my part of the update on the situation up here. But first, let me start with our panelist, Yasminullah. The audience, she is phenomenal. And I met her on various occasions. She came to my webinar a couple of times. But most importantly, as you heard, people like Yasminullah, those who are fighting in the front line of raising awareness, connecting people, and you have heard Yuriko's, this whole knowledge repertoire dynamics. So they are the people, those who are in the front line. And if you are further aware that it is through their work, Yasmin and others, that Canadian Museum of Human Rights, it has taken unprecedented decisions with regards to Nobel laureate and honorary citizen of Canada at some point in time, Aung San Suu Kyi. So this is what is so important in today's world, and thank you so much, Yasmin, for collaborating with us, and we are just at the backdrop of supporting your cause. Thank you so much, Yasmin. Security situation on the ground is quite complicated in Myanmar. As you see, most of the Rakhine state is still under sort of semi-lockdown, and internet connection is not there. And dear audience, you might be aware that nearly 600,000 Rohingyas are still trapped in Rakhine, and we are talking about 600,000. And they are in IDPs, internally displaced persons camps, and all the camps are actually resembles quite a bit of like concentration camps in Diden, Germany. And when I talk about security situation, let me also share that Arakan Army has upped their movements and actions in the northern part of the Rakhine, and that has given quite a bit of leverage to Myanmar's Tatmadaw, or the National Army, to conduct their operations, security clearance and security operations, unabashedly, and that is creating a number of casualties, as you might have listened from Yasmin in the beginning. The children died in a number of villages. So the security situation is quite complex, and one of the reasons that we view from here is that just because of security situation, I think a number of humanitarian actions, aids, and connections with the trapped Rohingyas down there is not happening. Second thing, what we'd like to brief you is about upcoming situation in the camps in Bangladesh and others. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 3 years now, nearly 1.3 million Rohingyas have taken shelter in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh does need help from international community just in order to survive them, give them food and basic necessities. If you go back to the joint response plan of 2019, and I think this year's joint response plan is also out. I don't have exact figures in my mind, but roughly the aid agencies are saying that they could get 40% of their expected amount, if I'm not wrong. But remember, rest 60% have to be given, because there is no other way out other than keeping them alive at least if we can. So whoever is listening to us from the policy side and otherwise from the international community, we need urgent support in terms of financial aid. And my country, Canada, has promised $300 million, which is going to be over in coming March 2021. And we are yet to hear a Canadian government's further commitment on that matter. Host countries' predicaments is getting, again, I would say, pretty complex. From Bangladesh perspective, Bangladesh government is doing its best to raise voice and pressure China to come into discussions. And I think there's something happening, developing situation in Bangladesh. China has recently, I think last week, and Professor Mazhar might be more competent to add on this point in his lecture. China has already called Myanmar and Bangladesh to come into a dialogue again, tri-party dialogue. And let's say if China comes up with any tangible solution. But what really worries me as an observer and researcher on this conflict is other countries' behaviors, conduct. For example, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has recently declared more than 20,000, if I'm not wrong, Yasmin, you can bear us out, that they are going to send them back to Bangladesh. And they formally asked Bangladesh government to issue passport. So this becomes a whole lot of discussion, and this is why we are very much worried at what is happening. Malaysia, we have seen rejected Rohingyas, boatload of people, and they ultimately took shelter in Indonesia. And also the neighboring country, India, pushed another couple of thousands, and all are coming back to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is unable to manage those people. In terms of accountability, I think we have conducted a webinar with Senator Marilu McFadden, and my country, Canada, joined with Gambia in terms of facilitating the next proceedings of ICJ. And finally, I would end up by saying that the overarching question you must have heard from all the panelists today, especially Yasmin, that how do we actually pressure Myanmar? There is no plan, there is nothing working actually. And this pressure technique or international tools, international community, all these are still up in the air. These are all fuzzy games we are talking about. We are trying to do, from academic side, activist side, but something concrete must happen. Otherwise, the humanitarian impending disaster cannot be avoided. And I'll just end by saying that Myanmar is having election on November 10th, I believe. So this general election, we know NLD will come back in full force, but is it going to change the lot of Rohingyas in the near future? We don't know. Let's watch and see. So this is all I had to share with you in terms of updating. And now I'll hand over and welcome George Budagu Makoko to kindly summarize the 4-part e-seminar that we had since last 4 weeks. And he has a huge task at his hand, but I hope he will manage it well in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamid. Dauphin, Dr. Hamid, respectively from the International Institute of Social Studies, the Ramos University, and also the Conflict and Resilience Institute in Canada, who are the co-hosts or the co-organizers. We thank you for your time and effort of putting the whole sessions together. I must take a time and recognize all the speakers from all sessions, our guest speakers. I hope you realize how much you've contributed to these amazing sessions. I also want to take a time to recognize all the moderators who've also participated in this effort. But also, I cannot go on without remembering all the audience from Facebook, YouTube. I don't know the numbers, but I think we've had quite significant numbers who followed us. But knowing that after this, they are going to click on and view all the records. My name is George Budagu Makoko. I'm the publisher of a local newspaper here in Portland, Maine, called Jambo Africa. But I'm also the president of an organization called the Ladder to the Moon Network. And this is an organization that was born out of my book that I published back in 2013, which is entitled Ladder to the Moon, A Journey from the Congo to America. I just want to all remember that our main topic was the unwanted people and the boundaries of citizenship, the struggles of the Rohingya and the Banyamulenge and others. Throughout these sessions, we've learned about the struggle of the Banyamulenge and the Rohingyas, this being, stigmatized, stereotyped, and being discriminated, expelled from their own countries, and those things that date from a long time ago, and from the time of a colonial and up to now. If you look through the readings, you realize that it's shocking how the international community had remained silent or had denied for many years the atrocities and genocide that these people have been subjected to. So what did we learn? That's the main question. And I must recognize that if I do not mention anybody's statement or anybody quote, it is not my ability to summarize the whole thing, but I have to recognize that I would just factor in acknowledging some of them. But you all know that you've been incredibly participating and engaging, and we thank you for all your knowledge and insights. So the first session was all centered around the definition of genocide, but also the 10 stages of genocide. And Dr. Stanton, who was the keynote speaker, raised very important questions. And he said that he's been warning about genocide for a very long time. In fact, in Kivu, he started warning about genocide in Kivu and Ituri since 1999. But also, he also recognized the fact that all those killings and genocide are all based on false beliefs. And he said that they're all stereotype. Some viewing others as invaders, as strangers, but yet he said that we all these so-called racial divisions are not based on truth. They are just based on false beliefs. But they yet have caused the millions of people, millions around the people to die around the world. And he said that something that resonated with me, and I think you all are going to see that we all one human race, and we should be treated as such. There's nobody's higher than others or inferior than others. We're all human race. So the second session, but also the 10 stages are very important, and that's where I want to emphasize. And he said that we should be able to detect the stages of a genocide and take action immediately. And he went on by saying about the classification was one of them, the symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, moralization, preparations, persecution, extermination, and denial. If anybody cannot make a notes, you have to go back and study it all of them and memorize them, so that whenever you see it around you, you'll be able to tell what's happening. Is it genocide or it's not genocide? But we also learned about, let's still go to we also in the first session, we also heard about the struggles of Rohingya that started, I think if I recall well, since 1948 until now. They were mentioned about slow genocide of Banyamulenge that has started many years ago and that is still happening even at this moment that we're talking about sitting here. The second session was centered around the challenges of a humanitarian mobilization. A UN peacekeeping mission in Congo, MONUSCO, ethnically polarized context. And here we heard clearly that some people were arguing and saying that there's a lack of a capacity of the UN to intervene and help people in the Congo because of a large country without infrastructure, but also the international community fatigue. The people are no longer wanting to give money to the mission in the Congo because it's been going on for a long time, and therefore they are just divided between should we just stop the mission in the Congo or should we proceed, and who's going to fund it. So all those discussions are taking place at the level of the UN, but yet people are dying on the ground. The other thing that we talked about, the challenges around humanitarian assistance in Minembwe. We heard from Dr. Lazar, who's from Minembwe, who's been watching the whole situation unfolding from day one until now. And he raised the question, or the very concerned that over 150 different attacks have been made against the Banyamulenge. He talked about over 500 people who've died already as a result of the conflict in Mulenge. But also deplored the fact that those people are being killed in a very humane way, and it's unheard of and unseen. He talked about over 150,000 people who've been displaced, and that just the internal displaced. But if we add something that Fidel touched upon, the refugees who are now in Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and here in the United States, in the UK, and in Europe, and even in Australia. Those are the Banyamulenge who've been caused to flee their land and now wandering all over the world. He mentioned about 100 schools and 50 health centers have been destroyed, and also over 250 livestock that have been looted or killed. So the third session was all about the historical categorization of autochthonous division power of warfare in Burma and also in DRC Congo, but also the legal aspect approach that we can take in this. And of course, this session also mentioned about different things, and we heard about people who are in diaspora and the effort they're trying to raise the awareness of what's happening in their own land and the struggle they face about denial and the systems that are there that are not easily to break through or to convince. And all of these are very important things that we've learned. But I want to come back to what can we do now? And this is something that if you recall from Dr. Stanton, he clearly spelled out the steps that we should take to stop the genocide. He said one thing, that first, we have to be equipped with the ability to detect the genocide, whatever is happening. But the second thing, we have to be able to collect all the information or the evidences and the facts and put them in a way that are easily readable or easily understood by lawmakers and superpower countries. He also said that we must have a determination. What I mean by that is knowing that it's not one-day process. It's processes that may take a very long time and many days and many years ahead, but we must not be discouraged. We have to keep and be determined to stop it until it's completely stopped. But also he raised a very interesting thing, and he said that we have to bring people who've committed a genocide to justice. And I think that's something that you're seeing and who they mentioned about it. How can we do that? But he recognized that this is it's going to be a tough. How can you get them, and when and how? That's a very complex process. So right now, one thing that I want to say is that for the Banyamulenge and the Rohingya and the other minorities around the world who are facing discrimination and targeting, but yet the world is very distracted by the COVID-19, the pandemic that has not been seen anywhere else, and people are struggling and millions of people have died. Every day we see people dying. But for the Banyamulenge and the Rohingya and the other minorities, they are facing two enemies. The virus that is all over the world, but yet they are being targeted on top of that. And that brings a significant amount of distress and despair, and they need help. I can conclude by just mentioning two statements, and this one is from Albert Einstein, who once said, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." The world will not be destroyed by people who do evil, but by those who watch and do nothing. I also want to say something about Desmond Tutu, also the bishop in South Africa, once said that if you are neutral in a situation of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. It's just so beyond my mind when you see the indifference and denial that we face every day. And people, you ask them a question about, is this happening? And they will speculate over the terms. But yet we know that people are dying, and should we just remain and watch, or should we do something, and what can you do? So raising the awareness of what's happening right now, it's very important and needed more than before. And we must stand, we must not sleep until we're doing what we can do, which is raising our voices. I'm concluding, and you know that I can go on and go on, but there's one day I was going around and doing presentation. One person told me that, and he says something and it resonated with me, and until this time I always think about it. He said that we all live here in this world, but we know one day we'll go. It's not a matter of if we will go, or it's just a matter of time. But once we're all gone, meaning dying, and all it's left out there for us is memories of what we've done, will be remembered by two things only. How many problems we've created, or how many problems we've solved. I wish and I hope that all of you who are here today, when you all gone and rested on your permanent bed, you'll be remembered by problems that you've solved. I can see that you're already in the process of solving problems, not creating problems. So let's not stand and watch evil destroying the world, but we must stop it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, for your very insightful talk. I would say it's highly relevant, and sometimes we also frame this thing is just to be in the right side of the history. So, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience, let us welcome our special guest today from Bangladesh, and he's going to conclude the whole session and with his wisdom and his experience right from Bangladesh. So, Professor Dr. A.K. Mazharul Islam.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, and thank you, Dr. Chair Helen Benjens, if I'm not wrong. So, and the esteemed panel here. It was extremely learning experience to hear from all of you. But you see, it's almost 2 hours, and you know the webinar culture that we have developed in the pandemic. It's like people are not very comfortable after 1 hour or so. So I mean, I'll be very brief by 5 minutes or so. So thank you once again, Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, International Institute of Social Studies, Erasmus University, and Winnipeg University, Canada. It's been an excellent effort. I mean, mutually done by you. And I was not very aware about the Banyamulenge community in DRC, and well, I have heard about it, but this is, thank you for giving me this opportunity to learn a lot about this Banyamulenge community in DRC. And about Rohingya, I know a little bit of it because I'm here right in Bangladesh. So I'll just say a couple of words on that. When I will share you with a small quote given by a Rohingya man of 42 years. He said, "When I set foot in Bangladesh, I started feeling better. At least here, they are not killing us." So you see that, you know, the expectation of people has lowered so much at some point that, you know, they are happy if they are not just be killed. So this is the humanitarian condition of the world in many parts of the world nowadays. So this is something that I thought I should share with you. And one of the UN UN persons who were there in the camp in Cox's Bazar, he was just saying that the Bangladesh government possibly didn't know what they're signing for, but thank God they did. All right, so they were like, they knew that Bangladesh is going to take all these, I mean, kind of all these burdens, if you call it a burden. But thank God they did it, and now it's 3 years, and you all of you know the situations. And I will also shed a little light on the economical politics that we always do around the globe. Like, for example, the unwanted people. You know, we have heard from the childhood that unwanted pregnancy and that sort of words, but that the unwanted people is kind of words that we have like developed over the years, that being people, being a member of this globe, we are declaring some people as quote unquote unwanted. And because they are unwanted, because they are the people of nowhere. I mean, they don't know where they will go, they don't know what they will do, so we call it the people of nowhere. But this unwanted is so loaded, and this is so strong that we need to work on it, I mean, from all kinds of perspective. So I think we ourselves should not declare that unwanted. We can say that they are the people of nowhere. I mean, we don't know what they will uh, what is their future is and where they will go, but probably they were not really unwanted. If they were really unwanted, they were not there in Bangladesh at the first place. They people welcomed that very well, but you know, they need to do something about it. Now this is time. It's about 3 years in Cox's Bazar. This is time that they need to get back, and we need to work really hard on it. And what are the ways? We always think that there is the only way is the political way. Of course, that's the most important way to do about it. But of course, we need to also work on both the soft and hard way. I mean, that's I mean, these the soft diplomacy, hard diplomacy, military diplomacy, you can name it. And of course, the citizens' voice, the thing that you have been doing for last, I mean, a couple of weeks. I mean, these are so important that their voice should be heard from all kinds of corners. So, and we always try to see that there is no not these webinars, these seminars, these talks are not that important if political government is not doing it. But if we are not doing it, why political government will do it? I mean, it's everybody's job to be a part of this problem. So I will just say that we need to do it simultaneously, and there is no way that we can just try it in one way. That in Bangladesh, for example, the China, uh, I mean, and the India factor, this is so critical that there is no conclusion of it. So but our hopes must go on, and we need to really try so that we can make a consensus that these people needs to have a future. And we, being Homo sapien and fellow member of this globe, we all of us have got that responsibility. It's not the people who are working with that, like Yasmin Ullah or other or Dr. Kausar, who are in the front line, but it is also us, all of us, who needs to do something about it. So I mean, I had a little small speech, but I'll just forget that, and I'll just conclude here by saying that it is our world and we need to take care of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mazhar, for wonderful concluding remarks. We appreciate it very much. This is the end of our adventure, I would say. And dear audience, just to recap, we started on 26th of September, Saturday, and the whole idea came from Delphine Natanyoma. So that is the basic, I would say, agreement that I want to make here. That Delphine came out and he sent me an email that can we do something jointly, because we met both on I think 26th August presentation with Dr. Imtiaz. So I immediately said, yes, of course we should. And this is how it all started. So after 4 weeks, that started from 26th of September, today we are here successfully concluding this joint cooperation. I would like to conclude, of course, and don't want to hold you back, as Professor Mazhar rightly mentioned, that it is torturous beyond 1 hour in today's webinar world. Just to have one anecdote here is that, interestingly, Congo mission by UN, which is called MINUSCO now, is the largest in number. And again, an interesting part, Bangladesh is the largest troop contributing nation in MINUSCO. So there is a common ground that Bangladesh is present in Congo, and we are talking about Banyamulenge. Nonetheless, just an observation. Also, for all of your consumptions, we are going to put all these 4-part series in our webinar archive. It is in the homepage of www.click.org. Please feel free to access anytime and listen to and go back to your observations. But in any given time, I have seen as a moderator or controlling the session here, we have seen 90 to 110 people logging in to hear and discussions and participating here. And all of their questions are there in the Facebook and YouTube pages. And of course, I would like to thank profoundly Dr. Helen Hingens for spearheading this initiative from across Atlantic. So it has been done wonderfully, and your support and your help and your encouragement do actually matter, Professor Helen. And we look forward for further cooperation. I would just like to end today by saying and quoting, of course, from my favorite historian, Yuval Noah Hariri. And as you have heard, Dr. Mazhar also spoke about Homo sapiens, and Professor Hariri is all about Homo sapiens. So he was saying in his famous quote that the cooperation, just cooperation, is the fundamental strength of Homo sapiens. And that is why this particular species have survived millennia, actually. And cooperation is what matters. And I would like to tell the audience today that what you have seen over this past 4 weeks is cooperation. This cooperation, you have seen these panelists here. Just think about their geographical locations. Yasmin from Vancouver, 2 hours behind Winnipeg time. Yuriko from Ottawa, 1 hour ahead. Helen and Delphine from Netherlands, I think 7 hours ahead. Professor Mazhar from Bangladesh, 11 hours ahead. Fidel from USA and Adele from USA, I don't know, 3-4 hours ahead. So COVID has actually taught us fundamentally how to cooperate. And this is what I would like to end our sessions. Thank you so very much for tuning in, being with us, and shared your wisdom. Once again, Conflict and Resilience Research Institute is super proud to have you and host you. And we look forward in the future for joint collaborations. Thank you once again. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Helen. Thank you very much. It was very well done.
Thank you.